I'm Andy Howell. I'm an astrophysics professor. There's a light side and a dark side, but I'm also a huge film geek. On this show, we take a look at the science in movies. We celebrate when they get it right.
It was believable. It's something that could actually happen.
And we school them when they get it wrong. Let's see what happens when we introduce some Martian wind. This is Science versus Cinema. Today on Science vs. Cinema, Arrival. Aliens have shown up all over Earth. Linguist Louise Banks and physicist Ian Donnelly are humanity's best hope of communicating with them before either they destroy us or we destroy each other. Did the movie get the science right? We're here at the LA premiere to talk to some of the filmmakers to see how they approach the material.
There's a reason it takes like 8 years to get a doctorate in linguistics. It's actually like really complicated.
I had to talk with physicists. I'm like, okay, great. Okay, I see why that makes sense. Why should anyone give a flying?
We'll talk to some experts.
I don't think you'll be able to use this. This is too physics geeky.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've spent zero time in my life as a linguist thinking about.
How do you talk to an alien? I guess the right answer is carefully.
And investigate some of the concepts in the movie. What's your purpose here? Arrival was directed by one of my favorite filmmakers, Denis Villeneuve, who made Incendies, Prisoners, and Sicario.
I just deeply felt in love with the short story, and I said to them, it's fantastic material.
It's based on Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, which builds on some profound insights about physics and linguistics.
It is not at all an obvious choice for adaptation into a movie.
Well, my prime directive was to take the way the short story made me feel and kind of gently lift that from the source material and find a way to transplant that into a film.
New science fiction by one of my favorite directors? Sign me up. I just hope they got the science right.
This is the day they arrived.
The object touched down 40 minutes ago.
One question I get asked all the time as an astronomer is, do you believe in aliens? There may be 1 trillion planets in our galaxy alone. It'd be insane if we're the only intelligent life out there. Astronomers are searching for aliens right now. I went to the SETI Institute to ask Seth Shostak how it's done.
People think of the Institute as being a place where we have, big cryogenic lockers with aliens in them or something like that. But in fact, it's offices.
SETI is just an acronym, right? Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So we're trying to do what Jodie Foster did in the movie Contact. We're trying to find out if there's anybody out there clever enough to build a radio transmitter that we can pick up using the big antennas we have.
Why look in the radio?
I get emails all the time from people saying, radio, that's so old school. Why are you guys still listening for radio? But radio goes right through the gas and dust that hangs between the stars. So that's a little better than, ordinary light would do. And it's also very cheap to build a radio transmitter that can do this. I mean, it doesn't require, technology you'll only find in sci-fi.
Why are we more likely to get a signal than have them visit us?
I mean, in the movies, the aliens often come to Earth, right? It's a very immediate problem. Either they're here to, pick some plants, play with the kids, or they're here to, trash Los Angeles. An idea which doesn't find much opposition here in Northern California, I've got to say. But I don't think they're going to come here. If you look for signals, you don't require that they go anywhere, and you don't have to go anywhere either, except up to the antennas and turn them on. So it's a much easier way of doing things.
So how would we communicate with another civilization when we don't share a common heritage or a common language?
People have a lot of thoughts on that. There's a mathematician in the Netherlands who's concocted a whole new language, Linkos, to talk to aliens. So maybe we should just start with, very simple mathematics. I think that's nutty in some ways, because if you were trying to explain, for example, government or reproduction or anything else here on Earth, and you had to do it with mathematics, I think that'd be hard. That's why my advocacy is usually in the direction of saying, just send them pictures.
This is the so-called Arecibo message. In 1974, this bitmap was broadcast in the direction of a big ball of stars. Could have done higher resolution, but it was, part of a ceremony, so they wanted the audience to hear beep, 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 beep. Sounds like Close Encounters of some kind.
Yeah. It costs more than 1 trillion times as much energy to send people between stars as it does to send messages. I think our real first contact with aliens will be signals. But that's a story we've seen before. Everything about communication changes when you can high-five an alien or punch it in the face.
Welcome to Earth.
And that's what Arrival tries to take seriously.
Not everyone is wired for what you're about to do.
What happens now? They arrive.
Who should we have communicating with aliens?
I don't actually think it matters too much.
Well, I would say maybe it does matter in that you don't want the most militaristic people doing the talking. You want the most level-headed people.
I mean, that sounds suitably peaceable and all, but on the other hand, I recall a scene in the original War of the Worlds film. We see that the Martians are here. And so a preacher goes up to them reading from the Bible.
And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
And they zap him right away. That's it. Vaporize him. And that's undoubtedly a reference to what happened when the Spaniards encountered the Inca. Some of them went up to the Inca himself, the king, and said, here's the word of God. And they gave him a Bible. And he put it to his ear, and he didn't hear any words. And he threw it down on the ground, and then hostilities broke out. So I'm not sure what you can do.
The main characters trying to communicate with the aliens in Arrival are theoretical physicist Dr. Ian Donnelly and linguist Dr. Louise Banks. I know something about physicists, but I don't know anything about linguists. So I talked to Dr. Jessica Kuhn, who was a consultant on the movie.
I was asked to read drafts of the screenplay and give feedback on the more linguistically relevant parts. They took pictures of my office. They wanted to know, what kind of bag do you carry?
Pack your bags.
Oh, you've got a tea kettle. Okay, good. She's going to have a tea kettle. And then I got to have lunch with Amy Adams. And that was a lot of fun. Also, she had lots of really good questions about, what's academia like? What's it like to be a woman in academia? What's it like to do field work?
You know what was wonderful and what kind of freed me up to play this was that I asked her how many languages she spoke, and she's like, it's funny, that's what everyone thinks, that we're like interpreters or translators.
There's one part that I think is going to make every linguist cringe, and it's in the trailer, and it's when Forrest Whitaker comes into her office and, plops down the recorder and says,
"You're at the top of everyone's list when it comes to translations."
As linguists, we really have to fight against this misconception that we are just glorified translators, right? That we just speak a lot of languages and that we're just learning languages, because really we're learning about languages and studying the structures of them.
It was also helpful because she's a very warm woman, and there was something about her that kind of reminded me of Louise.
But they were very kind and very gentle when they explained to me that, theoretical linguists are really not Hollywood's main audience concern.
So it sounds like they really did their homework with linguistics. But I'm a physicist, and historically Hollywood has done a pretty terrible job portraying us.
As you can imagine, they don't let us out much.
So you didn't play a stereotypical sort of lab coat physicist, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
So, did you talk to any physicists?
Yeah, Wolfram's book is what we used and had a lot of those guys on set to deal with certain concepts.
Wow, Stephen Wolfram, that guy's a legend. He created Mathematica, Wolfram Alpha, and a bunch of other awesome stuff.
We get a request saying we're about to start shooting this big movie, and we actually need some realistic screens that are made specially for this movie. Can you help with that in 2 or 3 weeks' time? And so then I looked at the script, and it's like, this is pretty interesting. Then I also said, hey, there's a few things here that really could be a lot better. Let me make some suggestions to you. They were like, okay, great.
There's nothing more satisfying than getting an expert in the field to come in and say, well, nobody would do that, and helping us.
My son, Christopher, happened to be available to actually dive in and do a bunch of programming.
What do you think about how code is normally shown in movies?
There's very rarely real code. Sometimes there is real code, but usually it's irrelevant. So, for instance, there's a particular file inside of Linux called nmap.h that people like to show in movies for some unknown reason. But it has nothing to do with anything they could possibly be doing. So I think this is fairly unique in that it's actually real code that's doing relevant things running in the movie.
For me, it did have a lot of reference points for the actual technology. People are creating their own language with the nonlinear orthography.
It's like Jeremy Renner is supposed to play a physicist. Jeremy should meet a physicist. So right. I'm the sample physicist.
It's just love for something that might be so different to other people. And that was sort of my approach to maybe what a mathematician, physicist is to seeing what he's been staring at the stars all this time, and now it's here. It's like the excitement about it, and the awe, and the amazement, and
Yeah, because if you're talking to aliens that have the secrets to physics way beyond anything we have, that's got to be the most exciting thing you could imagine.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that just happened.
That was sort of my human approach to the character, so maybe it doesn't feel like just like, yeah, I'm the last guy you'll ever make out with. You know what I mean?
I know a ton of theoretical physicists. I'd never mistake Jeremy Renner for one, but I love the fact that they did their homework and they didn't go with the stereotype. The portrayal of scientists in Arrival was far above what we've generally seen from Hollywood.
More objects have landed around the world.
This is one of 12.
So what did you think of the alien technology to get here?
Yeah, that was very unclear. I mean, the ships look like sort of bananas that have been on your kitchen counter for, 3 months. They all turned black.
I based the spaceship shape on the asteroid that is going around in orbit in the solar system, and the shape is insane. It's shaped like a strange egg. That strange, perfect shape felt ominous, mysterious, frightening to me.
Okay, but they never explain how they manage interstellar travel. Nothing about dilithium crystals or anything like that.
I kind of had this interesting experience of, okay, I've got one evening to do this, and so the first thing is invent a scheme for interstellar space travel. I have this whiteboard. I can do the kind of the professor thing. Okay, why is the spacecraft the weird shape that it is? Well, an amusing hypothesis is maybe this slightly weird shape is done to maximize gravitational radiation. If it's, spinning around, producing gravitational radiation to propel itself. The funky hypothesis here was maybe you could make a nonlinear graviton laser.
We thought that the spaceship should be made from a matter that is not from Earth.
You have to kind of have some very weird skin for the spacecraft. And so the idea would be that at that very microscopic scale where the actual structure of space-time is exposed, to have something where it's able to change its form down at that very small scale, probably around this thing called the Planck distance, 10 to the minus 34 meters. So that's how you kind of manage to slip through space-time.
I love the fact that there was a crazy awesome backstory about alien space travel, and yet it isn't shown at all. It informed the film at some unconscious level, but as Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Somehow, not explaining the technology conveys more awe and works better cinematically. Mild spoiler warning for this section. I'm going to talk about what the aliens in the movie look like, but we're not going to actually show them.
The alien shape started with Ted's work, really. Like he called them heptapods in the story.
They're not bilaterally symmetrical. They don't have an obvious face with eyes and a mouth.
I wanted the opposite of Star Trek Alien, where we have somebody with makeup and stuff on their head, and that was it. It wasn't until Denis came on board that we began looking at deep sea aquatic life that had just been discovered and found some inspiration in that kind of brand new life form.
That's one of the strengths of the film, having 7 appendages and looking like squids on steroids.
That kind of life form connotes a Lovecraftian horror and made us worry and fear. And that sense of fear is part of the theme of how easily we can misinterpret something.
I love this. I really like diving because it's the closest you can get to being on another planet. You're weightless and you're surrounded by all these strange alien-looking creatures.
Not a lot of people swim with whales in their life, but to have this feeling of being nearby a huge beast underwater, where you just feel a strong intelligence, a strong presence.
There was some suggestion earlier in the film that have a different atmospheric, maybe pressure, composition, and so on. And yet when Amy Adams' character goes into space with the aliens in this sort of cloudy atmosphere, she seems to be able to breathe it.
I don't know, I had her wearing a mask in all the drafts of the script, so I think that was a moment where it just didn't work out from a technical standpoint.
Hey, that's what happens in movie making. Sometimes you have to bend the rules a little just for the sake of telling a better story. The heptapods in Arrival are some of the most alien aliens I've ever seen on screen. I love that we live in an era of filmmaking where we don't have to dress somebody up in a suit. We can completely create aliens from scratch. Our imagination is the only limit.
Black tube.
Barada. Nikto.
The heptapods have a spoken language, but it doesn't communicate as much as their written language. That's because a spoken language has to be linear, but their written language is non-linear, that doesn't have a beginning and an end.
I wanted the language to be almost frightening, and I wanted the language to be very impressive. I didn't want something that can relate to any human language, a language that is coming from another way of thinking.
My wife is a painter, and she designed it. And I had other people have a go at it, graphic designers, linguists, and their approach was always something that humans could relate to.
Martin came with that strong idea of those circles, abstract circles, that looks almost like coffee stain with your cup, you know? I think maybe the idea came from there.
The design of the heptapod logograms is beautiful, but how would humans go about decoding such an alien language?
I didn't want the humans to use technology that didn't exist. I wanted them to use what is available today.
We were given all the images of all the logograms, of which there were maybe like 70 something, and then the idea was to try and analyze them in various ways, you know, as if you were actually a person in that situation in the movie. The first thing that I looked at was basic morphology things, finding key points. If you look at these two logograms here, you can see that the kind of base here is exactly the same. But so the way I think a lot of these were made is they had these various sections, and they'd have a logogram maybe for human and a logogram for maybe Ian. And then if they wanted to say Ian is human, they'd sort of combine those in some way.
At the end of the day, it's like teaching to kids. If you talk with aliens, you will use a whiteboard with a marker and say hello.
What Amy Adams' character is doing in the movie in linguistics is known as a monolingual discovery procedure.
So this is like when I'm trying to teach my dog to fetch. We don't have a way of doing that without a lot of trial and error and showing him the ball and so on.
Something like that.
So monolingual fieldwork is where you don't have a contact language, right? So often when a linguist is working on a language, there are people who are bilingual. And so, for example, a lot of the work that I've done with Mayan languages, I do through Spanish. But there are more remote places where that's not an option. In general, you'd start by sort of figuring out the vocabulary for concrete things and then trying to understand how verbs work by acting it out. So starting with the small things and then working up to more complex.
Big theme of the movie is, so how do you figure out, you know, what is the purpose of the aliens, so to speak? And so the question is, how do you build up a notion of talking about purpose? And purpose is one of those very difficult concepts that is incredibly culturally specific. When you think about sort of a non-human intelligence, the communication of a concept like purpose is really tricky.
What is that? Is that a new symbol? I can't tell.
In the film, they do a nice job of representing the language decipherment process of heptapod grammar.
I don't know any heptapods, but I do know a quadrupod. My puppy Tater. We're gonna do some monolingual field work. Just like with aliens, we don't share a common language with dogs. So we have to train them by example. I can do verbs like Tater, shake. Good boy. And some nouns. Tater, get the ball. Get the ball. Good boy. But those are easy because those are just nouns and verbs. If I ask him a question like, Tater, what's your purpose here? Why are you here? Are you here to play with a ball? When it comes to communicating with aliens, it might be a lot harder than just human-to-human translation. It might be as difficult as talking to another species, like the problems I have communicating with Tater. I love what they did with language in Arrival.
Human.
It looks truly alien, and the process of discovery seems realistic. All right, consider this a major spoiler warning. If you haven't seen the film and don't want to be spoiled, skip to my final review by clicking this button.
Are you dreaming in their language?
As we understand time, it is linear. One moment happens before another.
Dr. Banks? Hey, what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. They need to see me.
But for the aliens, time's non-linear.
I mean,
They have a completely different idea of time. You know, the future, the past, they're all, part of the present in some sense. This is somewhat interesting from a scientific point of view. As you know, in physics, most of the equations that we use to describe the world, they work just as well with time going the other way as going forward.
The aliens have a truly different conception of time and language and physics. There's no real cause and effect, right? So simple things like motion to us are simple, but it's complicated to them, whereas certain things that we write complicated calculus equations about are very simple to them.
Fermat's principle of least time comes into play there.
Fermat's principle of least time is probably the most well-known of the variational principles.
I'm going to do a demo of Fermat's principle of least time. I have a laser and a glass of water with some milk in it. When I shine the laser, when it hits the water, it bends. It doesn't take the shortest path. It takes the path that takes the least time. That's only meaningful if you know the endpoint of the light ray. In other words, if you know the future. If that's the true nature of reality, it simplifies many physics equations. But there's a consequence. It means there's no free will. They actually had a scene like this in the script, but it was cut. It's too bad because that's the key to understanding the aliens' perception of time, physics, and language. These differences are why it's so hard to communicate with them. As Dr. Louise Banks starts to learn their language, she starts to see the future like they do.
There are days that define your story beyond your life.
So you have to do a weird acting challenge here that very few actors have ever done, where you're acting out of time, where you're sort of acting in one timeline, but it's really informing another timeline.
As we go along, I, the actress, know it, but I have to play it as though the character doesn't know it. So you guys have an assumption of what's happening, and I really have no idea what's happening. So you actually, at that point, does this make sense?
Yes.
When you talk about it, it starts to kind of, unravel in my head.
Having been subjected to the nonlinear experience of time through the heptapod language, a lot of it happens on a subconscious level where she doesn't know until she's out of the fugue that something has happened. But the more that it happens to her, and we kind of go on a logarithmic scale throughout the movie,
What's going to happen?
I don't know.
the more she becomes aware in the moment that she's now been displaced.
There's an idea in linguistics that language could affect our perception of reality.
So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is this idea that the language we speak constrains or determines how we view the world.
So there have been some claims that, a certain culture, if they don't have the word for the color blue, then they don't see blue.
There's something very romantic about this idea, but linguistic studies have shown pretty consistently that the language we speak does not seem to have this kind of effect. An interior decorator probably has more words for colors than I do, right? There are all kinds of shades of white and off-white, but I don't think it means that I can't perceive the difference between these colors.
Most linguists will say that the strong version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is not true. But it's an idea which I think is really, really interesting, even though the strong form has been discredited.
I think it's one of the things that makes the film really interesting is that, when we're talking about human languages, it would actually be very surprising if a different language might wildly shift your view of reality. But when it comes to learning an alien language, who knows, right?
Even if things aren't quite like that in our reality, taking a hypothesis to its logical extreme is at the heart of science fiction.
I wanted to tell a story about someone who could see their future, who knew that great pain and great joy lay ahead of them, and choosing to go ahead because the joy would make the pain worth it.
And it really gets to this question of free will, that
Right.
maybe there is no free will.
Correct.
But there's a little room for doubt about free will in the movie version.
Right, and that's kind of where Ted and I diverge. I know the message that is baked into Story of Your Life is more the idea of embracing the inevitable. I'm a little more, I guess, rebellious in my belief that I need free will. Even if it's an illusion, I need to believe in that.
But it does introduce a bit of a paradox in that when she gets to the future, what if she did change a slightly different thing?
I think there are moments where you can infer that she did change some things. And so I think part of that is knowing the future and trying to figure out what you can and cannot change.
That may be more satisfying to an audience member, but but it's less satisfying to a physicist. If Louise is making choices, what future is she seeing? The movie leaves audience asking profound questions, like all great science fiction should. And you can always go read the short story to deepen your appreciation of the film.
So how do we clarify their intentions?
I go back in.
What is she doing? You are committing an act of treason.
Do you trust me?
For my money, Arrival is one of the best science fiction films I've ever seen. It had a dramatic and plausible first contact, realistic scientists, mysterious but well thought out aliens and spaceships, a beautiful language design that tied together physics and perception, and it had a thought-provoking take on linguistics and fate. I'm not sure aliens will show up on our doorstep soon, but they could be trying to communicate with us right now.
I bet everybody a cup of coffee that we'll find ET within 24 years, assuming we get the money to do the experiment, because you'll be able to improve the speed of the experiment so that you've looked at 1 million star systems. And I think 1 million star systems is the right number to have some decent chance of success.
Anytime we have a new capability in science, we make new discoveries. So we have a real shot at detecting aliens in our lifetime. Imagine the transformative effect that would have on our culture. But beyond that, just stepping back and thinking about these big ideas can inspire us today.
Maybe every working scientist should take 1% of their time and spend it thinking about science fiction.
I completely agree, and that's one reason we do this show. So what is your favorite science fiction movie?
My favorite science fiction movie, my gosh. I think 2001 is a movie that I've seen multiple times, so that's a good sign.
Close Encounters.
Really?
Yes.
I can see the parallels.
If we're allowing TV or something, then I'd have to say Star Trek.
I like The Abyss. That's probably one of my favorites.
I'd probably say Blade Runner.
Denis Villeneuve, the director of this film, is directing the next Blade Runner movie. Are you excited for that?
I am.
I think Arrival is a great science fiction movie, so I think I'll call it my favorite to date. I think it's great for our field. I hope we attract a new generation of linguists who want to translate for aliens someday.
We're gonna need them.
We might.
Out in the frontiers, just beyond our current knowledge, are where art and science can come together to make something greater than either could on their own.
So this is a program called Science versus Cinema. We talk to scientists about the science behind the movies, and then we talk to the filmmakers about the choices they
this will be, well, keep in mind, I am an actress.
I understand
I am not
that.
even the filmmaker. You must understand my limitations.
Oh yeah, such a step down. Yeah.
I am.
Let's see, where? My book. Let's see, this is my library, so my book has to be in my library.
But I do know a quadrupod. My puppy Tater. Sit.
I used it as filler for, let's see, come on, there's got to be a copy of it.
The difference between the present and the past. Because
the future, right? Sorry.
I'm in the middle of a thing.
And now he disappears because he can't find his own book in his library. I'll be back.
But I do know a quadrupod. My puppy Tater. Uh-oh.